Welcome to E3 Alliance's Road to Recovery webinar, a priority playbook for your school. This is our second time to share the playbook. Our first webinar was on June 16th, where we shared the playbook and some examples. Today, we're going to share more examples from each part of the playbook. Before getting started, I want to let you know that we will be providing the slides from today's webinar, the recording of today's webinar, and a roadmap tool for you for all participants in the webinar follow-up. We've also put a link to these resources in the chat. Also, if you haven't done so already, please add your first name, your role, and your location to the chat so we can create a Road to Recovery community of learners. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature and we'll answer a few of those towards the end. Also, please engage with our social media platforms, tweet or post by tagging @E3 Alliance. Now I'm going to hand it off to Matt to get us started.
Thanks, Terry, and thanks to all those who have messaged in the chat. We're excited to have leaders from all over Texas and many other states in the United States. Sharing the priority playbook today will be myself, Matt Pope, and my amazing colleagues, Terry Clement and Amy Havard. We also have from our team, Leticia Maynard and Lori Davis, who will be our moderators by engaging with you in the chat, sharing resources, and will support you in implementing the playbook. We're excited to guide you through this work today. We are a part of a team at E3 Alliance, a nonprofit based in Austin, Texas, whose mission is to transform education systems through data and collaboration so all students succeed. Today, we will share the priority playbook and dive into each category with what you must do to move in the direction of recovery and transformation. We shared examples in webinar 1, which is on the resource page, which will be shared with you. And today we will have new examples from each category of the playbook. We will also provide you with a roadmap to plan out this work with your team. We know COVID-19 has impacted all parts of our lives, but more specifically, it has challenged everything we think about schooling and learning. As leaders, we acknowledge this reality and stand ready to tackle the hard work of planning and opening up for this school year. We know you've been hearing lots of what you should be doing, but we want to help you by showing you how to actually start to move towards recovery and, more importantly, transformation. This playbook will serve as a guide to ensure the focus is on what is most important. Please review the chart on the screen. We were in the crisis stage with emergency remote learning starting in March until the end of the school year. We are now on our way to recovery, and what we are about to experience is reentry, which is in the transition phase. But let me be clear, August, September will not be recovery. It will be reentry. And it seems like the plans are changing every day, but we are still in the transition and not in crisis, because guess what? We can plan for what comes next, unlike March when we weren't able to do so. As we move towards recovery and transformation, stay committed to doing things differently, because we have an incredible opportunity to rethink our schools as we transform to a new normal. Now Amy is going to introduce us to the priority playbook.
Thanks, Matt. So let's learn about the priority playbook. This playbook can support you wherever you are in the journey towards transformation. First, leading forward is focused on strong leadership that will guide the transformation. Leading forward is the pathway which runs through all other parts of this playbook. Next, we must create a safe place where our staff, students, and families are healthy and secure. Once we have determined safety for all, we must send a message that we are all in this together by ensuring students and staff are attending and engaging in our community. Once we have them attending, we can then focus on reigniting our school culture to create a place where everyone feels like they belong. And finally, we close the gaps for all learners by providing equitable, high-quality instruction. Our webinar today will include more detail about each of these examples of what they might look like in practice. But remember, you must start with strong leadership and continue that leadership to build a safe place, get people there, make them whole, and then grow them academically. That is the priority for recovery. Before we dig into the first playbook category, I want to let you know how today's webinar content is structured. For each section, the first 2 slides will be from the actual priority playbook that's available to you. Following the playbook slides for each priority, we'll show you a few examples of what this can look like in a school. So let's get started with that first category, leading forward. Why is leadership its own category in our playbook? Leadership is the capacity to translate your vision into reality. We are dynamically developing a vision for the 2021 school year each day as we get new news and guidance. That's going to keep happening. Change will happen all throughout this year, but leading forward through these changes is the part we must get right. Today, I'm not just going to tell you how to be a great leader of this work. I'm going to give you some guiding principles, a concrete example, and a way to map out your own road. So exactly how do we lead forward into this work? It begins with engaging with a diverse and representative leadership team and recognizing that what was important before will still be very important as we move forward. Your leadership team should collaborate frequently to make decisions. In the June Road to Recovery webinar, we showed you an example of who should be included on your leadership team to ensure it's a diverse representation from all across your campus. A decision-making guide will also be critical to your team's success. This will help your team make decisions that align with your mission, vision, and improvement efforts, as well as take into account input from all stakeholders. The leadership team should also be the group that gives real feedback on how things are going in your school community, including culture and the systems being implemented. By checking the pulse through ongoing communication and collaboration, we'll know how these decisions are impacting all groups in our school community as we move forward through this year. As a leader, I would add a pulse check to all agendas for this leadership team to ensure the time to share is not skipped or forgotten. We have to continue improvement efforts that were happening in our schools pre-COVID. This disruption to our schools does not mean that the problems or challenges we were facing a year ago have gone away. They might have been put on hold or even exacerbated by the current crisis. Your leadership team should be using your decision-making guide as a filter to review your school's mission, goals, and improvement plans to ensure your new efforts of reentry are aligned. The last guidance to lead the transformation focuses on the importance of communication. Communication will determine the difference between effective and ineffective systems. As leaders, you must keep all stakeholders up to date by communicating explicitly, frequently, and in a transparent manner. This means internally to your staff and district leaders, as well as externally to families and your community. Your team should develop and utilize a communication plan that has multiple pathways and modes for the communication to flow, while also ensuring all communication is accessible. Schools have accomplished incredible outreach and communication during the spring and even the summer. Take those strategies and lessons learned and integrate them into your ongoing communication plan throughout this year. Now that you know the guiding principles for leading forward, let's take a look at an example of a decision-making protocol. In order to ensure decision-making is consistent and transparent, this campus documented the process they use to make decisions. Take a moment to read the steps in their process. Not all of their decisions can be made by consensus. So in step 1, the principal or district leaders state the decision to be made so that all understand exactly what is being discussed and details how the eventual solution will be chosen. For example, some decisions will be made by consensus with all agreeing on one solution, or by majority, the solution with the most votes, or by authority, where the leaders listen to all viewpoints before making the decision on their own. Different methods will be appropriate for different types of decisions. You can see the process includes time for each team member to give input and carefully consider all aspects and stakeholder concerns. It's important to note that the process is not over when a decision has been made. After a solution is chosen, the team still works together to determine how the decision will be communicated and implemented. Then the team schedules check-ins to review how the decision is progressing, to determine if adjustments are needed, and then make a plan for updating all stakeholders on the progress of the decision. This allows all stakeholders, not just the members of the leadership team who are in the room, to feel informed about what is happening in the school community. Here we see Douglas High School has used their decision-making process to determine their classroom observation expectations for the upcoming year. You can see the steps are listed in the first column from their decision-making process, and the discussion points are recorded in the second column as they go through the process. This example is in the PDF of today's slide, so you can read it in more detail later. The Douglas leadership team started by clarifying what decision they were facing and that the decision would be made during that meeting by consensus. So step one, they wanted to ensure that all classrooms were being observed so that they could uphold the same high standards for instruction they had in past years as they faced starting the year in virtual instruction. So this clarity guided the rest of their discussion throughout the process. They analyzed the different input and issues that might arise concerning classroom observations, and then each member had the opportunity to contribute possible suggestions to the solution. They all agreed on the solution system, and then they planned for how to share it with staff. Discussing this as a leadership team that included teachers and others from different groups across the campus meant that the resulting classroom observation system was acceptable to all who would be involved in it. Now I'm going to turn it back to Matt to discuss the next category of our playbook.
Thanks, Amy. A few months ago, when we realized we wouldn't be seeing our students in person, the first actions we took as school leaders went right to the bottom layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Were they physically okay? Did they have shelter, food, school supplies? Why did we go there? Because it felt like the right thing to do. And quite frankly, it still is. As we are preparing for this school year, the right place to focus is on ensuring our schools are a safe, healthy, secure environment for everyone. In order to create a healthy, secure environment, we must consider all stakeholder needs. Schools should be frequently gathering input from students, staff, families, district leaders, and community members to determine options for this year and adjustments throughout the year. But gathering input is not enough. We must also evaluate that impact of the decisions by continually considering the input and needs of each stakeholder. After gathering input and evaluating decisions for each stakeholder, we need to devise a clear plan for physical safety when staff and students return to the school building. This plan includes movement patterns and a schedule to minimize contact in common areas such as the front office, hallways, cafeteria, and more. The plan must include visitor procedures as well. Will we allow visitors or not? Do we do curbside, call in for pickup and drop off, and so on? Also, back to school events such as registration, meet the teacher, and open house are important to families. Consider multiple virtual options to allow families to engage and be considerate of their work schedules and other priorities. The final part for a safe place is designing variations and scheduling that meet the physical safety of all stakeholders while also considering how to close the academic gaps and eliminate access gaps for virtual learning. So let's take a look at some examples. Here's an example of a video a campus leadership team created as a safety tour of their building to communicate what they are doing to keep everyone safe. They used a combination of slides and a video to show all stakeholders the safety procedures and routines they can expect when the building opens. They shared the video with all staff and families via email and social media. They also set up a form for people to submit questions after watching the video. In addition, this leadership team set up multiple live Zoom webinars to discuss their safety procedures and address questions that had been submitted. This format could be used right now to introduce staff to safety procedures to welcome them back in the building. Since most schools in Texas will be starting the year virtually, here's an example of a school that thought it was important to make a video showing families how to keep students safe in a digital environment during virtual learning. Now we're getting into the fun stuff. I'm going to share with you 4 different example schedules to provide variations in scheduling to ensure equitable instruction for all and choice and safety for when learning in the school building is an option. Here's an example of an elementary with 3 teachers in 4th grade. All learning is virtual with synchronous instruction for the first 30 minutes each day in each core subject. Take a look at this example. Students are scheduled in 3 groups and receive their unique group schedule for virtual learning. Teachers teach all 3 groups synchronously in the schedule provided for 30 minutes and then have 55 minutes to support students individually or in small group on a rotating schedule. Each day, the 3 4th grade teachers have a Google Hangout with all 4th graders to do an SEL lesson and then do breakouts for students to talk and collaborate on a topic during the lunchtime for students. During teacher lunch and collaboration planning, students have a rotating special for 2 weeks. So group 1 will have music for 2 weeks, while group 2 has art, etc. Here's the same team, but now learning in the school building has become an option for students. Take a look at this example. This school is normally staffed at a 24-to-1 ratio, but half the students stayed in virtual learning. The school chose not to do more than 15 students per classroom due to physical distancing. Students stay in the same room except for recess, PE, and the restroom. All 3 teachers support in-person and virtual for their subject. They keep the students in the same groups that were online to keep it consistent. Virtual is asynchronous, with teachers filming the teach part of their in-person lesson and providing activities for the students to apply and demonstrate in their digital learning platform. So the virtual students get the in-person lesson a day behind the in-person students. Virtual students also join for synchronous SEL teaching from 11 to 11:45 and hang out with their in-person peers for their lunch break. Here's a secondary example with 2 subject teachers per grade level doing all virtual learning to start the year. This school has about 2 core teachers per grade level. Take a look at this example. This school wanted to provide choice for families by building different schedules, support, and the type of instruction between the 2 core teachers in virtual learning. Teacher 1 is asynchronous with time during the day to do check-ins and support with students in small groups. Teacher 2 is synchronous with live lessons for students in different options of the day. Both teachers have synchronous daily check-ins with their homeroom in the morning to make sure the students are attending and engaging, help with any questions, and deliver school announcements. Then they meet back up at lunch with their homeroom for SEL Hangouts. Here's that same secondary school as the previous virtual example, but now in-person learning has started for their school, and in-person and virtual are both an option. Check this example out. The gold team teacher stayed virtual to support the students who their families preferred to stay home. The blue team teacher now does 6 different blocks of students over 2 days to have class sizes of around 15 students. The students stayed in the room, and on each day, the teachers rotated among the team. Team blue is in person and team gold is virtual for every grade level to keep it consistent for staff, students, and families. So in addition to providing a safe place, we'll need to send a message of encouragement for all stakeholders to attend and participate in our learning community. Why does attendance matter so much? Well, besides the obvious, we know if teachers aren't teaching and students aren't participating, the learning doesn't happen. And learning is the purpose of your school, of any school. And even though recent months have required us to drastically shift our thinking around attendance and participation, there's no denying the power of the message that we are all in this together, all of us. So how can we support attendance? In order to support attendance, you must anticipate the difficulty and create the right team to do the work. We can no longer have an attendance team of just the AP or assistant principal and the attendance clerk. The principal, teachers, social workers, nurse, and others must be included to have diverse insight on your attendance team. And they should also frequently review different types of data to look for trends and determine potential interventions for support. With virtual schooling, alternate schedules, and higher rates of absences all being likely, it's important to ensure you have a strong plan for collecting and monitoring attendance and participation in any and all modalities. Attendance procedures are going to look different and be more intensive than in previous years. So it's important that all staff are given clear directions on what part they play in that system. And we know some of this will be changing as things change with the current public health crisis. So being flexible is super important. So let's look at some examples. Here's an example of a persistent communication plan developed by an attendance leadership team, and it includes static, recurring, and targeted communications for attendance. Take a moment to review this school's plan. You will see they share out an attendance student handbook once at the beginning of the year, and then when new students enroll throughout the year. Recurring communications include sending out the reminder for healthy attendance guidelines, where they remind students, families, and staff when to stay home and how to stay healthy. As well, they do wellness check-ins for every student each month. The homeroom teacher divides their students into 4 groups and checks in with 1 group each week. The targeted communications are for students who are at a tier 2 or tier 3 for attendance. These communications will be intensive and frequent. Tier 2 and tier 3 students either have previous attendance issues or are current concerns. So let's look at an example of a tiered support. This is not a checklist, but rather a menu of options that a campus team has to select from to support their students with attendance and engagement. Take a moment to review this example. Tier 1 is what school does for all students. This level of support includes routine check-ins, the attendance handbook, and healthy guidelines, as well as options for students and families of in-person or virtual learning. Tier 2 is for some students who have been identified to need more support based on attendance. At this level, students could have an attendance conference where a compact is signed and barriers and opportunities are identified. Barriers are the things that might be keeping them in the way of being present or engaging. Also, students could be assigned a mentor and review the different learning options if they want to make a switch to be successful. Tier 3 systems and support are for students who need more intensive check-ins and a detailed plan. This is also where a learning assignment could be made if one modality is not working for a student. If there's a learning assignment change, it doesn't have to happen at the end of a grading period if this is a mutual decision by the family and the school. Let's take a look at how this tiered support plan would look for 2 different students. So this is a student that has a single parent home and the parent cannot consistently be at home due to work. So take a look at their pathway of intervention and support. This student and family selected virtual learning as their option and received all the tier 1 supports. Unfortunately, this student started to display attendance concerns, so they moved the student to tier 2, where they participated in a conference where it was identified that this home and the parent not being able to be home during the day because of work what allowed for the student not to be monitored for engagement and participation. A compact was signed by the student to get commitment to engage in the virtual school. After a few weeks, they monitored and see if that plan was working, and it didn't, unfortunately. So the student was put on an intensive plan where the parent and the student and the school decided to switch the student to in-person school to be more successful with attendance. This is just an example of how your systems of support can differentiate intervention paths for each student who is needing support. Here's student number 2. This student and family selected in-person learning as their option and received all Tier 1 supports as well. Unfortunately, this student started to display attendance concerns, so they moved to Tier 2, where they participated in a conference. It was identified that the student was struggling with all the structure at school and staying in one room due to social distancing. That's why they just wouldn't come to school. A mentor was assigned to help support the student with navigating this barrier. After a month, the student was still struggling, and a plan was developed with the student and parent, where it's decided the student would go to virtual schooling and have daily check-ins with their mentor to help keep them on track. Now, Terry will share with us the next play on the road to recovery.
Thanks, Matt. Before we teach, we must re-engage and reignite our school culture to build a place where everyone belongs. We know that a positive school culture is the foundation for the work of a school. Our culture provides an inviting, supportive, encouraging, and inclusive environment for students and staff. As school leaders, we're the captains of our culture. Let your leadership of the culture of your school be informed by the lessons learned from the current events we're living right now. Let's look at some ideas to help you prioritize this work. First, keep connections before content as the filter for your culture leadership work. This can be accomplished by developing a reentry curriculum and spending your in-person time at the beginning of the school year supporting the learning and practice of building relationships, connecting, healing, and making sure our staff and students feel seen, heard, and a part of your school community. Your staff and students have been through a lot. These structures will provide an opportunity for them to have conversations about what they've been through and make sure their voices are heard. Other ways to proactively reignite that school culture include activities focused on building collective commitment statements to revitalize clarity of purpose and increase engagement from all stakeholders. Seek out ways to integrate healing-based practices and build shared habits of connection and communication. For example, engaging a team of leaders to determine the non-contact greetings for staff and students, a wave, a unique hand signal, air high fives, etc. These can be implemented virtually now and continue in practice when you resume in person, whenever that may be, right? So if the past months have taught us anything, it's that we really need each other and we need to connect. A familiar greeting or a hand signal consistent every time you connect with students can go a long way to making those connections. How can we keep the work strong throughout the year? Keep providing opportunities for building relationships. Collective commitments developed together must be championed and kept alive. Shared fun, shared voice, and responsive leadership to adjust the plan along the way are all critical to keep that culture alive and thriving. As the captains of school culture, leaders must focus on strategies to sustain and support the culture work you established at the beginning of the year. Let's take a closer look at an example of the reentry curriculum and the camp that we noted before. I'll pause and let you skim the contents of this reentry curriculum example. This example is from a high school planning to support students' re-entry into school for next year. The diverse representative leadership team who developed the content and design of this re-entry camp wanted to make sure There were opportunities for genuine connections, as well as building relationships and trust before we ever get to content learning. They developed this curriculum and a schedule for students to stay in self-contained layer groups, because they're the dragons, they're in layers, during the first week of school. Look at the topic list on the left of the screen, and I'll briefly paraphrase the content for you. Dragon DNA is the cultural diversity and appreciation lessons. Wellness workshop is where students learned about diet, exercise, stress management, mental health, self-care. The mindset study seminar is how they were teaching mindsets on their campus. The Dragon Way is about positive behavior structures on the campus and policies and routines. Community through communication is about restorative practices, discourse training, conflict resolution. And Believe There Is Good, Be the Good is their anti-bullying content. Let's take a closer look at one of the schedules from this camp. Take a moment to look at this example schedule. This is a day one schedule planned for virtual or remote instruction specifically for 9th grade students. The students will be engaged in synchronous, all together in a live video conference for the first 1.5 hours of the day with a variety of engagement scenarios and activities. The middle of the day is less structured, about 2.5 hours for them to watch some short videos, move around physically, and practice the wellness habits that they learned that morning. Teachers will also have time to prepare a plan and or meet during this time. Then the students return for 2.5 hours of live learning together with their Dragon Layer groups, focused on the curriculum and some math and reading beginning of the year screeners that they needed to get in to inform instructional design. The day will end with a return to grade level groups for team building. Take a moment to look at this example. Notice that this is an in-person example, specifically for 9th graders at this high school. So the needs of students at each grade level will differ slightly, so adjustments can be made for content, of course, but also scheduling of lunches and movement or transitions around the school to keep everyone safe. Also notice that there's time for them to learn as a Dragon Layer, which is a group of students that are assigned to a layer leader, a teacher. As well, there's time for them to connect with larger groups like their grade level, and they may do those meetings virtually, like by this schedule. Don't forget, this example, along with all our examples, will be included in the resources for today's webinar. Here's a more detailed example of a lesson plan from one of the Dragon Camp focus areas, Dragon DNA. Take a moment to just skim this lesson plan, and then I'll tell you some highlights. Notice there's an objective, vocabulary, and materials needed, all in detail on the plan. Then the lesson plan provides a structure and activities for students to understand culture and identify the cultural elements that they bring to the class. Then they develop a cultural banner together in small groups. The small group banners are compiled into one large class banner to show the culture DNA of their Dragon Layer group. The lesson plan also includes discussion and follow-up activities for the days following that. If the reentry camp is virtual, this lesson plan can be modified so that students are working in breakout sessions to build the banners in a shared collaborative space online, like Google Slides or whatever else they might be provided through your own system. Remember, reentry camp is just one way to build your culture and ensure a place to belong. We'd like to encourage school leaders to go above and beyond to support your students by focusing on healing-based practices. Let's look at an example of how to integrate healing-based practices into your daily routines with students. Depending on the procedures and master schedule of your campus, students may be eating lunch in the classroom with an adult or possibly one of their teachers supervising. Or if your school is 100% virtual, students are at home. So either way, this is a great time to bring healing-based practices into your interactions. Here's one example of a grade level team who has scheduled listening lunches for all their classrooms. On this campus, the teacher leads the listening lunches 3 days a week, while another adult leads twice a week. Students and teachers relax and have unstructured conversation while eating their lunch, and then they use the last 10 to 15 minutes of this time to participate in listening lunch activities together. Also, consider that this sort of activity might eventually be an opportunity for student leadership. The adults fully participate in each activity along with the students to model vulnerability, honesty, and listening, but the student leaders can facilitate the activity. During distance learning this past spring's quarantine, many of us on the E3 Alliance team noticed that our own children were arranging video conference lunches with their friends and joining teachers' virtual office hours just to connect and talk. So we believe this is something schools can provide to enhance the connections and relationship building for your own students. Now that we have a team leading this work, a safe place, our school community attending, healing, and connected, we can focus on closing the gap by providing an equitable, high-quality instructional model for all students. Here's what we know. If we know we can't catch up, and we know there's significantly more learning loss than typical when returning from summer break, then our practices must change. Here are some ideas for prioritizing the work of providing equitable, high-quality instruction for all. We know we'll need to plan for strategic, thoughtful adjustments in our curriculum and how to integrate pre-assessments to inform that adjustment. This will allow us to provide what we determine will ultimately benefit our students in the long run and help us make the best use of our instructional time. Remember that in the last webinar, we spoke about the urgency for implementing evidence-based instructional practices and shifting away from remediation towards acceleration focused on mastery of the most essential current grade level standards. Our students also need to be empowered through personalized pathways and student-focused learning experiences rich in relevance and peer collaboration, with the teacher taking on the role of facilitator, providing guidance, support, and input. Let's look at an example of how strategic adjustments in curriculum and utilizing pre-assessment could look. This example process begins with studying and selecting standards, followed by developing unit and pre-assessments. Using pre-assessment results to adjust your instructional plan will help you narrow your focus. This team of 6th grade math teachers collaborated to study the standards from their first unit. They studied the 5 standards designated for the unit, and through their discussion of the language of the standards, study of previous assessment items, and connections to college, career, and real-world readiness, they concluded that they should focus on 2 of those 5 standards. Next, they built a post or a unit assessment with 10 items and a much shorter pre-assessment. The results of the pre-assessment helped them to narrow the focus of instructional time and support to only 1 of the standards. It should also be noted that the unit or post-assessment did not change. It's important that they continue to build on the strengths that the students have already demonstrated. With a laser focus and an understanding of where students are in their journey to mastery, the teacher team engaged with a mindset of acceleration to design lesson plans that focused on getting all students to mastery of their grade level standards. Now let's take a look at how this effort to ensure evidence-based instructional practices could manifest in some example lesson plans. The lesson plan examples we're sharing with you today, just to remind you, are all available on the resource page. So I know the print's really small here, but you'll find that link in the chat. So on the resource page, you have these lesson plans. This is an example of a lesson plan for a teacher whose students are experiencing 100% virtual or remote instruction. The live session with a group of students is part of a plan that is informed by a focus on the most essential standards. The 1-hour session is rich with evidence-based, brain-friendly, student-focused strategies. And finally, the live session closes with communicating with clarity what students will be expected to do with this learning as they move into independent critical thinking and practice application. Parts of the live session are recorded to provide support during asynchronous learning, along with opportunities for collaboration and feedback with and from both teachers and peers. In this hybrid example, half of the 6th grade math students are learning asynchronously and remote, while half of the students are attending school in person. This teacher plans with both groups of students in mind to ensure continuity and equity of planned instruction, no matter the modality. Again, there are parts of the in-person lesson that will be recorded to share with the remote learners to ensure that their learning is well matched and aligned. A closer look at the in-person part of that lesson plan shows us that the focus for this lesson is narrowed to a single essential grade level standard that aligns with college, career, and real-world readiness. Note the inclusion of evidence-based strategies such as structured academic talk, student anchors, and writing to explain. These are all highlighted overall and within the lesson where the teacher has noted the purpose and impact of each strategy. This lesson plan was developed for a student group that includes English learners, students from poverty, students receiving special education or gifted and talented services. Each strategy chosen will serve their specific needs, as well as raise the quality level of instruction for all students. The plan is detailed for optimizing instructional time and ensuring that change of state occurs at age-appropriate intervals. Keeping informal formative assessment opportunities frequent throughout that lesson also will increase the quality and focus of the lesson. When looking closely at the aligned plan part of this for the remote students, this same lesson, we notice that the resources and assignment are provided with a range of time, allowing those in the at-home environment the necessary flexibility to engage with that content and experience that learning. Notice also that this learning begins one day following the in-person lesson this teacher has in the in-person and remote learners at a staggered cycle. So while new learning is taking place on Monday for in-person students, remote students are completing reflection on last week's learning and engaging in pre-learning of vocabulary and visuals to activate prior knowledge. As well, personalized pathways for students are provided by allowing students to respond through a variety of platforms. This particular assignment could be created, for instance, by hand, and then they could take a picture and send that image to the teacher, or students may choose a number of digital platforms. This assignment also includes remote learners engaging as a community and giving each other feedback on their work, ensuring they're benefiting from peer interaction as well. The inclusion of student collaboration here in the remote plan means that evidence-based strategies are being used in both learning environments. A weekly check-in conference with the teacher will also provide opportunities for further feedback and support. I hope you found these lesson plan examples helpful. Remember, they're all available on the resource page, and you'll find that link in the chat. Now that we've learned more about each category on our Road to Recovery Priority Playbook, I'm going to ask Amy to share the Priority Playbook roadmap to help you make your own plan for your school and your learning community. Amy?
Thanks, Terry. Deliberate and collaborative planning is the roadmap to doing anything well. To help you and your leadership team plan how to implement the priorities that we've included in this playbook, we've created a downloadable roadmap. The link is being posted in the chat, but you can also find this roadmap at any time on our website, along with the Priority Playbook. This tool is intended to provide guidance and a workspace as your team discusses putting the priorities into action. There's a tab for each priority or section of the playbook in this document. The team can complete each section or jump to tabs that best fit your needs at any time. Let's walk through the Close the Gaps priority. On each tab, there are several workspaces where you and your team can collaborate on the systems and steps needed to provide equitable, high-quality instruction for all. In each workspace on this tab, there are a few lines of examples in addition to the space for your team to enter your own plans. In this workspace, the first one, your team can plan for how teachers will study and prioritize standards to close the gap, much like Terry showed in her example. As you scroll down in the Closing the Gap section, the second workspace is for determining assessment norms for both in-person and virtual students. The next section is supporting the implementation of evidence-based instruction. The Closing the Gaps tab continues with a workspace to plan for supporting and sharing blended and virtual best practices. You can see at the bottom of each tab, there's a space for your team to capture the action items you've generated as you work through this priority. The last tab is the roadmap for strategic planning based on our priority playbook. Start by moving over all the action items you've identified on the previous tabs into the blue space across the top. Then assign a priority, starting with one as the most urgent, to each item. Next, you can sort the items into the timeline at different points throughout the year and determine the details for each action step. While there are obviously still things you'll need to consider both now and throughout the school year that might not appear in this tool, it is intended to be a way to help your team get started on the road to recovery. As you work through the sections of this playbook, your team will be building those habits of strategic planning that will enhance any of your future work you undertake to serve your students, families, and staff. You can find the roadmap at any time on our website, and it will also be included in the follow-up from today's session. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Terry to answer some of your questions.
Sure, thanks, Amy. Our first question is, I'm going to ask Matt to address this. Matt, in the section about we're all in this together, you talked about different interventions, different tiers support for students. Can you elaborate on what you mentioned about the Student Family Engagement Compact, like what one of those would look like, what the meeting would look like?
Yeah, thanks, Terry. Thank you for the question as well. So the compact would be developed by the school attendance leadership team, and it's basically a commitment form. So what are the commitments that that student or family are going to take to improve their attendance and or engagement? So the compact could actually be a skeleton that the commitments are developed in the conference with the families, or it could be commitments that are already identified by the team, and in the conference, they're checked off by the family and the student and the teachers or staff at that conference. So it could look many different ways, but it's basically a commitment contract for getting students to engage and attend better than they previously had been.
Thanks for addressing that, Matt. We do have some questions about, and I'll put this to both Amy and Matt, see if you have some insight to offer. When it comes to building teacher capacity at a lightning fast pace right now for them to be leaders of remote or hybrid model learning, I mean, other than just, PD, but maybe how would you structure that PD, or what do you think is the answer to making sure that teachers feel very supported and more confident moving into these new modalities?
I'll start and then Matt can jump in. I'll say the first thing to really building teacher capacity is to make sure that you have the systems that are needed to support their work. So that starts with having, a really clear collaboration system where teachers know when and where they're going to be getting together each week to plan and discuss. It also is important to have that observation and feedback system that we've talked about. Even if you start the year with virtual classrooms, it's still important for teachers to be getting feedback. That might look different than doing in-person classroom visits. It might be leaders and instructional coaches viewing videos that are posted or reviewing the work and feedback students are getting virtually. But again, building teacher capacity means that we really have to think about giving a consistent, aligned feedback so that teachers know where and how to grow. And then the last thing I would say, we've seen a lot of great examples from campuses that we work with of leaders making a pathway for teachers to share successes with each other. So if that's at your weekly collaboration meetings, staff meetings, or having some after school or ongoing short professional development time, could just be a 45-minute virtual session that teachers join after school, but having teachers on your campus who are doing great things with either hybrid, remote, or blended learning show what they're doing to other teachers, and they become the leaders of that work as well. There are people who are getting this right away and are figuring things out, and you want to share that expertise across your campus.
True.
Yeah, I agree, Amy. I think what we typically find is that within the same school community or building, teachers don't even know what other teachers are being successful at. So by providing a space to collaborate and share can dramatically increase teacher capacity and performance. I would say the leadership move on top of that is to narrow the focus of what you want your teachers to get good at. But by saying we're going to get good at all of these platforms or all of these different ways, no one will ever be good at 10 different things, but I can try to be really good at 2 to 3 things. So narrowing the focus of what instructional expectations or commitments we have will help increase teacher capacity because they have a pathway to actually improving.
Thank you guys for that answer. And I would Matt, just to piggyback off what you said, I think that narrow focus is also going to benefit student learning because they'll have an opportunity to get more familiar with those shared practices. Absolutely. We do have time for one more question. Matt, there's a question about, back to your, we're all in this together. You talked a lot about support for student attendance. Do you have any thoughts on how to prioritize supporting staff attendance and really, making staff feel supported and ready to engage in that learning community?
Great, and I know this is probably a pressing concern for many school leaders and district leaders currently as news about which plan is being released for what school will look like in the next few weeks. A couple of things that I would provide as suggestion or guidance would be, A, build those commitments with staff. What am I committed to? And then how do I get to that commitment? Is it either in person or virtual? But then also, if you think about that three-tiered pyramid that we walk through for student systems of support, design that same pyramid with your district leaders, specifically human resources or human capital, so that you have a pathway of intervention or different options to provide for each staff member that may have challenged attendance or might be challenging in this transition to in-person or remote schooling. But the guidance I would give, since it deals with staff attendance, I would work directly with the district to develop that tiered support, specifically HR, and then have the different options to walk through with that staff member to let them know, A, there is an attendance concern, because most leaders don't tell staff members there's an attendance concern, and then how we're going to support them with attending and engaging in whatever school modality looks like.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Awesome. I'm going to try to ask Matt to go ahead and close us out with some information today. Thank you so much for answering those questions.
So in closing, use this playbook and roadmap to plan for reentry on the road to recovery and transformation. Share the playbook and the roadmap with other campus and district leaders. We know this is hard work and everyone is struggling to keep up with the news and the latest guidance while adapting everything schools do overnight. This is why it's important to build partnerships with organizations, and we can be that partner for you. Contact Lori Davis about our partnership opportunities and ask about a complimentary coaching session with your team to help you with your needs as you use the Priority Playbook. Also, we will have another Road to Recovery webinar on September 17th at 2 p.m., where we will do a status check after schools have started and how we can modify and adapt plans using the Priority Playbook based on current realities in September. And I laugh because September seems like an eternity away from now, because we know things are going to change at a rapid pace. So we wanted to do another check-in after the beginning of this next year to figure out what adjustments you can make to steer your course towards transformation. The registration has been added to the chat, and we would love for you to join, and we'll also send it out via email. Thank you for attending today. We look forward to collaborating with you on this road to recovery. We must take this opportunity to do something great, and with the Priority Playbook, it allows you to focus on what we must get right. Have a great day.